So just a quick note before this video. You see the title asks, are feminists preventing men from getting food and shelter in an emergency? And there's a question mark, and there's a reason why I've posed it as a question, as you'll see in the video. But I want to make two notes. Firstly, I know that this is not how all feminists think. So if you're watching this at home and you're a feminist and you think this is ridiculous, that's not what I think. That's not what I believe. I believe you. I agree with you. The problem that MRAs talk about when we criticize feminists is a lot of the things that the more political feminist organizations are doing. Things that don't necessarily make headline news, but that these political groups do that cause laws that discriminate against men and boys. So it very well may not be what you as a feminist believe, but you have to pay attention to what some of these groups say and do. The second thing, I know some people may say, this video is kind of going a little bit too far and is kind of getting into like crazy conspiracy theory. But there's a reason why MRAs have these kinds of suspicions. It's because we've seen things like this happen before. I've covered many of them on my channel. These kinds of things do actually happen, and MRAs are trying to bring attention to them. So anyway, let's watch the video. Okay, so feminists are recommending that men are deprioritized from relief for disasters such as hurricanes. Take a look. Experts say disaster relief plans need to center on women as hurricane season approaches. Now, if you've watched this channel and know about me, you know I don't just like throwing out baseless accusations of anti-feminism, and you know I don't like the men's rights movement just being about anti-feminism. But I'm going to back up what I just said in a little bit. But take a look at this. The Biden administration announced last month that it would give $1 billion to communities, states, and tribal governments to prepare for extreme weather events and natural disasters, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, etc., through FEMA's Pre-Disaster Building Resilient Infrastructure and Committees program. So pay attention to that. Building Resilient Infrastructure and Committees program, BRIC. This is the website for BRIC. Now, I'm just going to point out that this is not the actual policy to exclude men yet. I went through the website. I don't see anything about gender, but I did put a link down below if you want to dig through it, just to note that. But take a look at what some feminist groups are suggesting. Okay, so here's where feminists come into play in this story. In anticipation of hurricane season, experts like Christian Nunes, president of the National Organization for Women, aka NOW, which is pretty much the largest feminist group in the United States, say Biden needs to orientate natural disaster policy and government budgets around the needs of women, who are among the most vulnerable when it comes to climate change and a warming planet. First of all, that theory that I hear feminists say that women are somehow more at risk of climate change is nonsense. Like, how are men immune from flooding? But anyway, so just again, a reminder, this is the National Organization for Women saying this. It's a large feminist organization. Christine Nunes is the president of an official feminist organization that advocates for policy and lobby changes. So just keep in mind where this is coming from. Also, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I've heard Nunes pronounced as Nunes, and I can't find an interview of her, so I'm just going to alternate, but sorry about that. She talks about things like domestic violence and how women are more displaced during disasters and have more PTSD. You can read the whole article down below. A lot of it's very vague. But here's something she said. When women are displaced due to these disasters, they're put at more risk for harassment and violence. This is a direct impact in contributing to why we see women having more risk of PTSD, as well as other anxiety and acute distress disorders. Now, I'm not denying that women are at risk of violence during a disaster, but certainly that's not something exclusive to women. But then take a look at what she says here, which kind of is a little bit of a concern. So the article goes on talking about Nunes, the president of NOW. In order to combat this, she reminded local governments who receive BRIC, remember that program above, BRIC funding to treat the communities they serve as people and provide them with things like shelters and victim services. Now, I agree with that idea, but would men have these shelters and victim services too? And I'm not saying if she wants to have separate shelters for women, fine, but do men get any shelters or victim services? How exactly is she intending that? Now, here's a quote that kind of caught my eye. It's really important that we figure out ways to provide resources like food supply because a lot of women are single heads of households, Nunez said. How are we supposed to provide the resources for them to take care of their children in these times? But wait a minute, why is it important to find ways to supply food supplies because a lot of women are single heads of households? Isn't it important to find food supplies because literally every single human alive needs to eat? So if you have a single father who's the head of a household, is he included in this process, or is he left to starve? I mean, I'm not accusing her of saying men are being denied food, but given the fact that we've seen things like this happen before and happened recently with the restaurant relief bill, it does kind of make you question, because the UN does a very similar policy to that, and it's just something to keep an eye on. And here we go. This was the scariest paragraph of the article. This is what my title is referring to. I always promise that my titles are not hyperbole or clickbait, and this paragraph shows why. To receive some of this inequality, experts say states that receive BRIC funding should consider giving women and their families priority access to shelters, housing, adequate health care, and food supply, along with investing in the local organizations that are already serving these populations. It's not saying make sure that women aren't left out. It's saying that make sure women and their families get priority access to things like healthcare, food, housing. So when it says women and their families, so again, what's the difference? Going back to the restaurant relief argument I made, what's the difference between a husband and a wife versus a wife and a husband? Like, how does the order work? And again, what if it's a single father who's taking care of 2 kids? Is he included in this? And what if it's a single man? What if it's a man who lives in a city with no female relatives? He doesn't get access to shelter. He doesn't get access to food. I mean, that's being denied food. That's a very scary prospect. And again, the reason why my title is a question mark is because I can't really accuse anyone of saying this, because notice what it says. It just says, experts say. It doesn't quote who or what is saying it. But I do think it's probably a fairly safe guess what kind of person, what ideology would come up with an idea like this, if you really think about it. Anyway, I put the links to this down below. It's something to pay attention to because it's something that is potentially quite frightening. And just one last point to make about this. The paragraph where it's talking about giving women and their families priority, some people might argue, well, that's not excluding men. It's just giving women the priority. But men will still get it in the end. The reason why that's dubious is because, and you'll see examples on this channel, we've seen examples of this happening before where the word priority ended up being code word for only. And by the time you get to the end, there's not enough resources left for men. And that's the way it happens in practice, regardless of the wording. So just something to keep an eye on. Just one more thing to add. This video is not blaming Joe Biden or attributing this to him. I know I mentioned him and the BRIC policy earlier, but this is not about Biden, and this is not blaming Biden. But feminist groups have been pressuring President Biden into doing this. So we'll see what happens.